Thank you very much. I would like to welcome everyone here tonight, especially my father-in-law, Chaim Mendelson, who has come here from Montreal. It's fitting that his visit to Ottawa today is a historical society meeting. If you know anything about my father-in-law, his experience in the camera business, this will be my first plug of the evening, at Simon's Camera, is indeed historical. He's here tonight as a backup to my wife Sandy, our projectionist, in case we run into any trouble with the slides that we are going to show to you during the course of the evening. This presentation will attempt to describe some of the experiences of people who have lived in Ottawa or been in Ottawa for almost the entire 20th century. I sincerely hope that all of you will find the memories and the related slide pictures over the next 45 to 50 minutes or so informative, nostalgic, and just plain fun, reminiscing about the past, and in particular, focusing on the lifestyle in Lower Town. My mother's family background, the early years of Rose Aegis. My mother, Rose Appel, was the youngest of 7 children born to Kensel and Sophie Appel. But she was really the baby of a family that actually had 13 people living together. That's 13 people living together under the same roof at one time. Her parents were married in Europe and lived somewhere in the Russian Pale region, which is now called Byelorussia or White Russia, somewhere between Minsk and Pinsk. The 3 eldest Appel children, Minnie Gershon, she was married to Erwin Gershon, George Appel, and Sarah Schwartz, were born in Europe. They and their parents came to Canada before World War I. My grandfather, Kensel Appel, was a carpenter for the Grand Trunk Railway, which later became the CNR, and he rose to the level of shop foreman. At work, I'm told there were only a few other Jewish workers, a Mr. Lesch, Norman Lesch's father, and a Mr. Woolstein. Now, Mr. Appel, my grandfather, he could afford, through his work, to buy a duplex home on Clarence Street between King Edward and Cumberland in the 1920s. And this Appel family homestead remained in the family until the early 1970s. Now, whatever income, in talking about our grandparents' generation, and I stress our grandparents' generation because I believe their life experience is very typical of the way people lived, whatever income people earned in those days, they showed a generosity of spirit that would serve all of us well today. In my grandparents' home, in addition to their 7 children, 2 nieces and 1 nephew. That's 2 nieces and 1 nephew who were in Europe. Their parents had died. They were orphan children. After World War I, they were brought to Canada by my grandparents to live with them. Their family name was Gettelman, and I'll refer to that in a moment. Also, my grandmother's sister, Razel, was brought over as well. So when you add the 7 children and the 3 nieces and nephews and the grandparents and the sister, that's 13 people lived in one half of the duplex on Clarence Street. I understand that almost every Lower Town family has a story just like that one. Now, the Gettelman family is worth gossiping about a little bit. The Gettelman boy of the 3 children who came over left for the United States after a few years living in Ottawa with his aunt and uncle. And his grandson, whom we remain in close contact with, is named Rob Freed. He's a movie producer. He won an Oscar for Best Short Film a few years ago. He was briefly the president of Savoy Motion Picture Studio, which is now closed. He's also married to the actress Nancy Travis, who has a TV show, which name I don't know, and is supposed to be starting sometime this fall. He's not the only celebrity of the Gettlemans. There is a more distant Gettleman cousin who does not have an Ottawa connection, but it is a Gettleman, and he married a woman named Estelle Gettleman, who later in life achieved some fame in television under the name Estelle Getty. My grandfather was a member of the Chevra Kadisha. His daughter, my Aunt Rita, remembers many discussions, even arguments, between members of the Chevra Kadisha in the Appel living room about the cost of a Jewish burial. And my grandfather constantly advocating for lower fees for poorer people. Some things never ever change. My grandfather was Shomer Shabbos. My Aunt Rita Appel, who was the sole surviving of the 7 children, remembers to this day the singing of the Havdalah service every Saturday night at home. The synagogue was a big part of the Appel family life. My grandfather was a founding member of Machziki Adas, the Murray Street Shul. He spent a lot of time there as part of the volunteer carpentry crew which maintained the building. He was in the small group that interviewed and hired Reverend Weisbord, the longtime shamus of Murray Street Shul. But most of all, he was very friendly with Reverend Abraham Baker, the Chazan, whom he admired greatly for his cantorial style. And Reverend Baker, of course, is the grandfather of Alan and Barry Baker. My grandmother, Sophie Appel, would cook and bake, and the children's friends were always welcome to come over and eat cinnamon buns on Friday nights right after school. Now, the eldest Appel child, Minnie, who married Erwin Gershon, I'm sure many of you will remember, lived and operated a confectionery store on the other side of the Clarence Street duplex. Long before Steinberg's or Loblaws brought in kosher food sections, everyone knew Erwin Gershon as the man you would telephone for your Passover needs, and he would personally deliver it. My mother and several sisters, Rita Appel, Ray Victor, went to York Street Public School. In wintertime, for excitement, they might go to Heaney Park, to Toboggan, or to Rockcliffe Park to walk up and down the small hills to ski, but there were no ski toes. In the summer, a big thrill, I'm told, on Sundays would be to ride the open-air streetcar to go to Britannia Beach for the day and hang out in the water or along the big pier that jutted out from the beach. As teenagers, Imbro's Restaurant on Rideau Street was a popular hangout to have a Coke and sit for hours schmoozing. As older teenagers, it was a thrill to go to the Standish Hall in Hull or in the Gatineau Club. Rosie was the typically pretty, happy-go-lucky, fun-loving baby of her family with many friends in her group, including Dora Cherm Wasserman, Eve Balin Toronto, Etty Viner, and Inez Zelakovitz. Sandy? The first slide on the left is Sophie Appel, my grandmother, and on the right, Kensel Appel. And the eldest of the 3 Gettleman children, Molly, is in the middle, and she is still alive, and she is over 90 years of age. And that's Minnie Gershon. And that's Erwin Gershon, I believe on the left, with his brother and sister. Now, that on the left, and I have a infrared pointer if you can see it, is Ray Victor, Sarah Schwartz, Rose Aegis, and Rita Appel, the 4 of the Appel girls. And that is Jack Gettleman, the grandfather of the Freeds, Rob Freed, the movie producer. That's a young Sarah Schwartz. Am I blocking anyone's view? No? Okay. That's my mother. Now, before we flip to the next, before we flip to the next picture, for those of you who remember my mother at that stage in her life, I remember how friendly she was with Eve Balin, and the next picture is of Eve Balin, and to me they're very difficult to tell apart. See if you would agree or disagree. That's Etty Viner. And you can see on the bottom that was May of 1936. I do not know who the woman is on the left. Does anyone know? Well, it's my mother on the right. I was hoping someone could tell me.
Looks like cousin someone.
Okay. Now, I may need some help. On the left is my mother. That's Eva, Dora Wasserman, Sarah Schwartz, and Etty Viner, and this is in front of the home on Clarence Street. Dora Wasserman. Dora Churm Wasserman. That's not Dora? Who is it? Okay. I see Dora Wasserman brought a posse with her tonight. Go ahead. Yeah? Is that Dora Wasserman? Thank you. And that's my mother and Etty Viner. And that is, starting on the right, my mother and Dora Wasserman and Sylvia Kamen, and that's her late husband, Arthur Hirschfield, from England, who came to Canada, I believe, during the war when they met, and he died at a very young age. And Sylvia's here tonight with her long time and very fine husband, Mr. Kamen. Now that is Reverend Abraham Baker. I have two slides of him in his formal pose and also elegantly. Now, on the left, I believe, is Jaime Wasserman. The late Jaime Wasserman. His wife is here, but I don't think the girl he's with is Dora. I do not know. I brought the picture because to us it was a safe picture because it's Rose Aegis with Joseph Aegis. Does anyone know who is with Jaime Wasserman? Well, a girl. Okay. Okay. I'd like to talk a little bit about my father's background. It's been recommended to me that I should start by asking if Joseph Aegis, Israel Dabrowski, Joseph Parkovnik, and Izzy Aegis, all of you, would you please stand up? And lo and behold, you're going to find that there is only one person standing. And I'm going to try and explain it. Now, my father's mother, Esther Bodnoff, of the Bodnoff clan, was one of 11 children. She came from Russia at age 11 with her siblings at that time, Benny Bodnoff, Millie Schiller. The three of them came together as very young people. And several of the Bodnoff clan ended up in Ottawa. And other siblings included Abraham Bonnet, Sarah Ginsburg. The entire Bodnoff family, to this day, celebrates family reunions periodically, where up to 150 people might attend. The Bodnoff, and this is important, I don't want to make you jealous, but the Bodnoff clan displays its own family crest in Latin. And that family crest, some of you here know, it's Summa Cumma Forta Fuda. I'll repeat in English. We come for the food. Sama, kama, forta, fuda. We all have this crest, and we're very, very proud of that. We have many good eaters in the Bodnoff family. So many arriving immigrants endured hardship in the early years. In the case of my bubby Esther, by the age of 20, she had buried 2 husbands and had to raise 3 children on her own in an age when the government didn't take care of you with welfare checks or other benefits. She could not read in the English language, and typical of a young European Jewish female, she had very little formal education. My grandmother Esther was married at age 16 to Zalman Dabrowski. And please bear with me because the story gets a little complicated with all these names. At 16, she was married to Zalman Dabrowski. In typical fashion, Dabrowski wasn't even Zalman's real name. His real name was Parkovnik. When he entered Canada, he was given his sister's married name, which was Dabrowski. Now, this person is my father's real father, Mr. Dabrowski or Mr. Parkovnik. And my grandparents, in this marriage, Mr. Dabrowski and my grandmother, had 2 children fairly quickly. First my dad and then Saul Aegis. Zalman Dabrowski then died in the flu epidemic, which killed so many people, I believe around the world, in 1918 or 1919. One of my grandmother's sisters had also died, and her husband was Sam Aegis. So the brother-in-law and sister-in-law were quickly put together, got married, and within a few months after this marriage, this second marriage for them, Sam Aegis was killed in his wagon when struck at a train crossing. Now, my grandmother Esther was already pregnant with her 3rd child, Zelda, who in fact, that's Zelda Berzin, is the only true Aegis of the family. Sam Aegis had been in the ice delivery business. After the death of Sam Aegis, his brother Jack took over the ice delivery business, and I'm told was very well known in the Jewish community for that. Now, Jack is the father of Matt Aegis, Sam Aegis, Arnie, and Mary. And since people used ice boxes for cooling in those days, there were no refrigerators. People like Jack would cut chunks of ice from the Ottawa River, store them, and then deliver it to homes. Now, his son, Matt Aegis, the late Matt Aegis, who was a long-time excellent athlete, is reputed to have acquired some of his prowess and strength from his early efforts, helping his dad cut and carry big blocks of ice. Now, after the death of Sam Aegis, my grandmother's second husband, she and the children had no money and no means of support. Joseph Aegis was 3 years old at the time and was now the man of the house. But he also had to deal with the fact that he had, in his 3rd year, contracted polio, which left him with permanent, significant restrictions of his left shoulder, and he's also left-handed. His brother Saul later contracted scarlet fever at age 12 and almost died, and remained affected by a weakened heart for the rest of his life. And he then ultimately died at age 51. My grandmother and the 3 children moved to St. Patrick Street and lived in a 2-bedroom, for want of a better word, shanty. There were no mattresses. They slept on springs. The sheets and pillows were made from flour bags. The only heating was from a stove located in the kitchen area, and in the front room my grandmother set up a confectionery business with very little for sale. She had no cash or credit to buy very much. The entry level of their living quarters on St. Patrick was below street level, which meant in the winter time, when the snow melted, it would flow into the apartment. At times you could skate on the floor. When I asked Carl Wasserman if he remembered my father's living accommodations, he laughed and said there was usually condensation coming off the first floor. Now, Jack Gordon, who I see is here tonight, that's Sandy Cook's father, on hearing this story, He claims he knows the truth, that the mist in the room was really just a leaky air conditioner. I wasn't there, I don't know. At the back of the stove, there was a large tin container filled with water which would be heated. That was their hot water. The kids would bathe together once a week from this water. They stayed there for 5 years, and this estate home caught fire in 1923 when my father was age 8. And that's when they started their nomadic travels. They moved to Creighton Street in a half of a double, similar to the home on St. Patrick. My grandmother tried to make a go of her confectionery business there and couldn't. And then they moved to Bank Street near Billings Bridge, which I believe is near where Bessie and Mo Greenberg lived. And my grandmother was hoping she could do better there in the confectionery business. But living near the Rideau River was an adventure in those days, particularly in the spring when the river would flood and their yard and main floor was often underwater. My grandmother still couldn't make a living there, so she moved to King Edward, and then 2 different places on St. Andrew. For a while they shared a home with Mrs. Spector and her 4 children, and then they moved to Nelson Street. Some of my father's recollections of his childhood, naturally, is that one of his most difficult tasks was to try and remember his name. He, as well as some others, knew it was really Parkovnik. At York Street School during the day, he might be registered as Dabrowski, and in Cheder at night, he was Aegis. Also, his full name is Joseph Israel Aegis, or Dabrowski or Parkovnik, while many people know him as Joe. To his closest friends and family, he was Izzy. Some of his memories included from Lower Town in the early days, this would be the 1920s. Every Thursday, he would go to the Byward Market and pick up a live chicken, put it into a potato bag. The chicken was then taken to a shoykit for kosher killing. The shoykits he remembers were Mr. Mazer or Reverend Mirsky. My dad remembers on Friday nights, all the men would make it home. Many were away from home, peddling, I understand. And they would put their horse and wagon away. The stable was the equivalent of our garages today. And everyone went to shul Friday night, Saturday morning. Many went to shul Saturday night. His closest friend was Carl Wasserman. My dad claims, and Carl confirms, he never owned any toys, couldn't afford it. But Carl Wasserman was the kind of friend who shared it with him. The toboggan, the bicycle, for example. My father remembers being fairly observant. At Cheder, the teachers terrified you with words, go to shul or God will punish you. Yet, one of my personal favorite stories comes from the fact he said to me, do you know that Lorne Green was a very good friend of mine for several years when I was young. And I said to him, oh yeah? Well, where do you know him from? And that's where, to me, the good story started. Because I found out that they met at Volksschule, where my father attended for a couple of years rather than going to Cheder at that time. And that shocked me as somebody of a member of a different generation. Apparently, my grandmother, desperate for income, often rented out a room, and for a couple of years the Volksschule teacher rented it and talked my grandmother into sending the children there. Now, why is it a shock to me? I had no idea my entire life that Volksschule ever existed in Ottawa. Please remember the religious orthodoxy of Ottawa's 3 main synagogues in the early years. Murray Street Shul, King Edward, Rideau Street. The comment my father made about the Cheder experience of frightening people to go to synagogue. The pressure of strict religious observance from the Cheder teachers. Volksschule, as I understand it, was very much a secular experience based on social justice and Jewish culture. The home of the Bundists, the trade unionists, the labor Zionists, the socialists, even the communists. I can hardly believe, and this is why it's a shock to me, I can hardly believe that in one stage in my life, and actually my dad's life, that my dad was being filled with ideas similar to what he accused me of when I was in university. He was a young pinko, a leftist commie. I can't believe it. His mother used to give him 5 cents a day for milk and egg salad. For entertainment, the children of Lower Town loved to see Western movies at the Francis Theatre. To this day, my dad loves dusters, Western movies. And one of the things he liked about them is how different they are than movies today. Then, he says, instead of kissing the girls, the cowboys kiss their horses. At age 15, he and his friends put a team into the Jewish Men's Softball League, which was forming in 1930. And the team was called the Sons of Israel. My dad claims to be the main organizer for the team and raised money for the sweaters. He never forgot Lawrence Freeman, who gave him $10. My father always remembers Mr. Freeman and mentions it, that he was an elegant gentleman who would give the same warm hello to the important and not so important people of the Jewish community. Now, the players on this softball team stayed together for about 10 years, and they included Joe Ginsberg, the catcher, and Brown, the pitcher, Eddie Sedinsky, the third baseman, and other players such as Dave Mazer, Norm Applebaum, and my Uncle Saul Aegis. There were other great players on other teams like Mike Baker and later Irving Shap Shapiro, married to Sadie of the Bodnoff clan. Now, there were many disappointments in life, but my father has one burning disappointment. At Rideau Street Shul for the high holidays, Joe and Carl Wasserman and the other boys would try and enter. An usher would typically stop them and say, "Who's your father?" Well, my dad didn't have one. And he was told, "You can't come in." It left a burning impression that he turned around as a positive force in his life. He was determined, absolutely determined, that when he got older, people would remember his name. This situation and experience, together with all the other disadvantages he was already facing, steeled him to the discipline and drive to get ahead in life. And the classroom was where he could do it first. He was always a pretty decent student, but by the time he reached high school, he was the gold medalist for each of his 4 years. And we're very proud of that. And I would invite you, if you have a moment at the end of the evening, I stumbled by accident at Sid Hartman's home one day where his grandchildren were reading the 1932 yearbook from the High School of Commerce. And they were talking about different Jewish students who were attending there, and the grandson turned to Sid and asked him, "Who is this fellow who is sitting at the top picture of Commerce's noted celebrities, their best students? And who is this Israel Dabrowski?" And that happens to be my dad. And if you have a chance to read it, you will see that what he told us for years and which we doubted actually is confirmable in writing. I've also included, as a matter of interest to those of you who wish to take a look at it, pictures of other Jewish students who graduated that year, like Eddie Sedinsky, who bears a remarkable resemblance to his grandson Teddy, who was about the age of Eddie was in the picture, Herman Rudman, and Sid Hartman. There's also a cute picture of my late Uncle Saul Aegis playing for the Cub basketball team, which is up on the stand to my right. I'd like to talk a little bit about the Wasserman family, because both the Aegis and Appel families were connected very early on with the Wasserman family, and it is just another one of the typical Lower Town stories which affected so many people. The Wasserman family lived across the street from the Appel family on Clarence Street. My dad and Karl Wasserman were best friends from an early age. And the Wassermans had their own challenges. Harry Wasserman and his wife had 6 children, and Mrs. Wasserman died shortly after the birth of Ernie, the youngest. She was only 28 years of age. So her mother moved in and raised the 5 boys and 1 girl. That girl is Etty Hirsch. The Wassermans, of course, are synonymous with furs, and Karl tells me his dad would go to Algonquin Park and other remote areas to buy pelts from trappers and sell them at auction houses to European buyers. And there were several other Jewish men doing the same thing: Mr. Pleat, Mr. Black, Mr. Morris Goldberg, Mr. Adelman. Karl's wife, Lil, had her own story to tell. At 2 years of age, her parents couldn't afford to keep her, so they gave her up to her aunt, who raised her and legally adopted her. She later married Mr. Brill, who was a baker in Ottawa. Now, today we have the Rito Bakery. As a child, Karl tells me there were 5 Jewish bakery shops, including Mr. Brill, Mr. Mossian, Mr. Bodnoff. And at that time, Karl believes the size of the Jewish community would not be more than 1,000 members. Karl remembers as a youth the tremendous social impact, particularly on the European-born members of the community, when 3 or 4 times per year, performers from New York or Montreal would come to perform Yiddish theater at the Monument National Theatre on Dalhousie Street. 250 to 300 of the small community would attend. If I may quote Karl, they would be crying Vetig. How's my Yiddish, Karl? That, I'm told, translate to your soul crying with pain, as the show would bring back memories of the old country. In their teenage years, it was at Karl Wasserman's house on Clarence Street that Joe Aegis looked across the street and first noticed Rosie Appel. My dad was around 19 years of age, and Rosie was a carefree 15-year-old. Karl's memory is that he brought my dad across the street to the Appel house to broker a relationship with Rosie. Rita Appel, my Aunt Rita Appel, she remembers that my dad would come to the house under the guise of the mature, older boy, advising my grandparents, advising Mr. and Mrs. Appel, that Rosie was simply too young to be allowed to hang out at Imbro's or date with anyone. Everyone could see through what was happening, even Rosie, and pretty soon the relationship between them started. After graduating from high school, my dad held various bookkeeping jobs and then joined Lou Copeland and Martin Levinson, who had an accounting firm. And my father started many works of study towards a chartered accountancy degree. Every penny earned went to his mother to support the family. Sandy? Now that is my grandmother on the right with the children, my father behind my grandmother, Zelda, and Saul. And that's in 1936. It's a young picture of my father. Now, I may need some help with the Bodnoff clan. It's my grandmother and her sister. Which one? I'm not sure. And her brother. That's Benny, and this is with his wife. I don't know, Montreal. Bernice Feller. No, that's her brother, Jerry Bodnoff. Her brother? Go ahead. My father in the middle, on his left, Karl Wasserman. Can we get a focusing? And Jaime Wasserman. Nice picture. Go ahead, Sam. That's my my father and Uncle Saul. My father and mother on the right, and Zelda and Mo Bearson on the left. Father and mother. 1939. Okay. My parents married in 1940. Even though my father wasn't earning very much money, a significant portion of his income still went to help support his mother, even after he was married. My parents moved to Friel Street, which was just a few doors from where Lenny Farber's family, I remember, had a store. His parents had a store on Friel near York Street. And they rented a two-bedroom apartment where they remained until 1950. Stan was born in 1943. I was born in 46. And just before Sharon was born, we had run out of room and we moved to the Civic Hospital area. For many years, my dad continued to work for Martin Levinson, eventually becoming a junior partner. Many of Ottawa's Jewish accountants came through that office. Herb Nadolny, Izzy Landau, Milt Greenberg, Leon Glusman, and Morris Agolnik. The most famous client of that office was Robert Compo. Not for too long, but he was still there, and he left because he grew so fast in his business that within a few years he really needed a national accounting firm. In the late 1950s, my dad and Morris Agolnik left Mr. Levinson and went into their own private accounting practice. Some of my dad's volunteer work in the community included the job. He was the volunteer secretary for the Jewish Community Council. And the services that he provided may not be so important or interesting, except for the fact that while he was doing the job, they realized that they really needed a full-time paid secretary. And so they looked for someone to hire and gave this man his first paid job in the Jewish community, and that was Hy Hochberg. And he replaced my dad in that job. My father was always looking for ways to help support his family. His friend Lou Schwartz asked him in the late 1940s to work a few nights per week at Carson's Restaurant on Bank and Spark Street after leaving the accounting office at the end of the day. This began a relationship of over 50 years with the restaurant industry. Later, Saul Aegis switched his job and became a full-time manager at Carson's. Now, around 1948, my dad and his brother Saul bought the Diamond Barbecue. This was the first restaurant to serve barbecued chicken cooked on a spit, a lot like Swiss Chalet today. And this restaurant, I believe, was an Ottawa institution through the late 1950s. Saul was there full-time, using his great people skills to welcome many of Ottawa's well-known people who became his friends. Sister Zelda's husband, Mo Bearson, came and stayed for the long term as a manager. There was also a period of time that one of their managers was Jack Edelson. Now, the Diamond Barbecue, you may not know, started a catering business while Jack Edelson was there as a manager. Jack ran it, and it was going so well that Jack left with the catering business as his own with their blessing. Jack Edelson Catering, of course, continues operating to this day. Now, I'm curious to know, and I'm just going to ask for a show of hands, how many people are there in the room who ate at the Diamond Barbecue in the 1950s? All right. This is the interaction. This is the interaction portion of the evening for us. I'm just going to ask a few of you, if you care. I ask you to stand up and just tell me, what was your favorite dish?
Chicken liver.
The desserts. Well, my dad is listening, and I think he's saying to himself, if people just felt this way today, the restaurant might still be open. But you're right. There were many, many special favorite dishes for people. The pies were unique. The chef named George, if you ever made it to the kitchen, baked the most delicious Alaska rolls and other pies, the chicken livers, the barbecue chicken. For me, the ice cream sundaes with no ice cream, just chocolate sauce. It was fabulous. Now, Sam Macy was a good friend of my dad's, somewhat older than my dad, and he was a very enterprising developer of land and rental property who was always willing to bring in partners such as my dad, Hy Soloway, Roy Sape. I think he's an historical figure in Ottawa who's worthy of mention. My dad always felt he learned a lot from Sam Macy. The remnant of Sam's life work is reflected today as part of the operation of Levinson Viner. Joe Viner and J.C. Levinson married Sam's daughters. Now, Sam's youngest son, Murray Macy, wanted to go into business. And Sam Macy came to my father and said, look, I've been like a father to you in business. Now I want you to take on that role for my young son. And so around 1954, that's 45 years ago, Sherry's Restaurant on Spark Street was born. It was named after my sister Sharon, and Sherry's was also a successful food operation. For years, children ate for free on Sundays. The Spark Street Mall was created, I believe, around 1960, and it was an integral plan of business development in downtown Ottawa. And my dad and Murray Macy and my Uncle Saul were very much part of it. In the present age of outdoor cafes everywhere, we forget that Sherry's became the first sidewalk cafe in Ottawa. And Sherry's is now known as Yesterday's and is still in operation. There are many personal events in the life of my parents which is representative of Ottawa life in the late 1940s and into the 50s. Let's start with Hillel Academy. My dad and a group of other parents worked very hard to start Hillel Academy. Believe it or not, I'm told, against the active opposition of many leading members of this community. So while many people deserve credit as founding parents, my dad claims that if it wasn't for the efforts of Louis Akbar and Rabbi Kravitz, all the good work of the rest of the parents might have achieved nothing. And so from that first class, the names of Howard Goldberg, Gail Steinman Victor, the late Dr. Sheila Lithwick, the late David Zabar, who was killed after 1967, serving with the Israeli Defense Forces, Carol Wexler, Mitzi Arbuck, Ronnie Cantor, Lenny Kaufman, Harvey Swedlove, Suzanne Berliner, and Stan Aegis go into the history books as members of the inaugural Hebrew day school class together with Rabbi Kravitz as the first principal. Teachers like Mr. Bauer, Mr. Levine, Miss Perry and her recorder lessons. Gail, do you remember that? I'm going to rewrite my speech. We remember the summer cottage experience at Britannia. The Aegis and Appel clans squeezed into half of a double cottage with Jaime Wasserman and family on the other side. The whole neighborhood seemed to be Jewish. Within a few doors, we had all three Zelakovitz brothers, the Gertzmans, Harry Fine, the Litwaks, the Swedkos, the Gossowiches, the Jacobsons, all in the immediate area. How can we forget the fun and memories? We took our drinking water from an outdoor water pump. Harry Fine, I remember, was a rich man because he owned a telephone. Nobody else did. The train tracks next to the cottages, which is now part of the Ottawa River bike path. Every train that went by made the cottage shake like we were in the middle of an earthquake. The visits to Britannia Beach and that enormous pier, or going to the quieter sandy beach. And a couple of times each summer we got into our pajamas and piled into a car to go to the Britannia Drive-In, right at Bayshore Drive and Carling Avenue. This drive-in was only torn down a couple of years ago to make way for the Coliseum movie theaters. What about life on Clarence Street then, in the late 40s and 50s, in the Appel family residence? Now, Clarence Street, they had the first TV in our family, so Stan and I would stay there many weekends. And our personal favorite, Saturday night viewing, wrestling from Chicago. Religious observance moved to Clarence Street to stay with our relatives for the high holy days so we could walk to shul and not drive. After that practice changed, how many people here remember going to Beth Shalom and parking several blocks away during the high holidays out of fear that Rabbi Eckstein might see us driving? Yet almost everybody was doing what we were doing. I remember every Saturday morning going with Aunt Sarah Schwartz for a chocolate malted Freeman's in the basement. A machine sort of like it, but not quite as good, is still there in the Bay Rito Street store basement. Sandy Marcello remembers the crowds of people in their best clothing hanging out on the King Edward Street Boulevard. I'm sure you remember that beautiful boulevard in the middle of the street, separating traffic, which was wide in those days and had beautiful walking paths and trees. I personally remember trekking after Stephen Victor and all his Lower Town friends, particularly following after the sports teams that Stephen organized when I was the water boy, the bat boy. Stephen, the Farouk Flyers. Where did you ever get a name like that for a Little League baseball team? I remember Dan Cantor, Len Cogan, Sheldon Taylor, Larry Ballin, Murray Cohen, Alan Solomon, Irving Swedko. And there was a boy I remember so well as an excellent all-round athlete who talked to me, the little kid, so nicely, and thanked me when I had spent my allowance and bought bubble gum for my heroes. And that person is Jerry Slipikoff. What a special person he was to me when I was a little kid. Now, some memories of other 50s events for us baby boomers that I think we can identify with. First, Sunday morning activities at the JCC when it opened, and buying hot dogs from Abe Nadrich behind the counter. Saturday afternoons at the Ottawa Rough Rider games. Every August, the rides at the Ottawa X. Smoke meat from Yippee Kardish. Camp B'nai B'rith. The Rock and Rollers. Now, I know Russell Cronick and Mark Max and Kayla Mirsky-Balin were fabulous singers, and they sang folk music, and they became professionals. But the Rock and Rollers, that was Stephen Victor, Stan Aegis, and Sheldon Taylor. They sang and gyrated to the rock and roll music that we really wanted to hear. We didn't care whether they could sing or not. Ray Halpern Goldstein, who lived in Lower Town from the time of birth in the late 40s, has many memories of her early years, and she shared one with me. Her dad, Charlie Halpern, passed away in the late 1950s and had a kosher butcher shop. It was difficult to get VOD approval to sell the shop after he passed away. There were simply too many kosher butchers. So Ray's mother sold it to the Portuguese bakery, which is still there on Nelson between Clarence and Murray. And Katie took the large freezer, the chest freezer, and put it in her living room. And for years, many of the neighbors and friends and former customers seeing this in the living room continued to store their meat in the same freezer. And people were always coming and going to pick up and deliver their meat in the living room of Ray's home. So, I'm going to show you some slides from the 40s and 50s. And that's my father with Stan, born in 1943 on Friel Street. And Saul with Stan. I like the car. And that's my father with Stan and I. Now this is on Friel Street again, and this is my mother and father and Stan, Arlene Wasserman Schway with Jaime and Dora. Thank goodness Jaime's not with another woman in this picture. And that's Joel Wasserman on the left and myself on the right at Parliament Hill, I believe at Tulip Time. And this is Britannia. And I'm not sure of everyone who's here,
It's a picture of Sarah Schwartz, myself and Stan. It may be Joel Wasserman, and Sandy Schwartz is here, and I think that's Arlene.
Yeah.
Okay. And again, at Britannia area at the beach with Stephen Victor, Sandy Marcello, and Stan. Now, there'll be 3 pictures in a row of each of the children. I'm going to ask you as a quiz, second part of our interaction, does anyone know which professional photographer took this picture? So, Sandy, if you could just flip through them quickly. Well, it was the Jewish Karsh. Does anyone have an idea? It was a Jewish photographer. Marvin Flatt. Marvin Flatt, the famous Jewish photographer of the 50s. Sandy? Campany Brith, the Tents. And that's Stephen and Stan, I believe, in their first summer with their mothers, who probably made their bed for them that day. This is another popular spot. When we were kids, I remember Hotel Vermont in the Laurentians. And in the picture is Adele Steinman with her mother, myself, my mother, and the 2 Cantor girls. That's Elsa and... I don't think it was Linny. It is? Her hair was that fuzzy? Okay, her mother's here. We won't challenge that. Go ahead, Sam. That's the same one. And it's the same picture, and I believe that's Nat Steinman and Gail Steinman in the background. Okay. That is the first Hillel class. Suzanne Berliner, Sheila Lithwick, Gail Steinman, Rabbi Kravitz, Mitzi Arbuck. Help me with this. Who is that? Can't see. Carol Wexler, Lenny Kaufman. I don't know this boy's name. Stan, Harvey Swedlov, David Zabar, Howie Goldberg, and Ronnie Cantor. And there is a picture, another picture of that class on the board that you can take a look at. This is when they've grown up after 8 wonderful years at Hillel, the same group. And they're graduating. This is an early Seder picture at our house with Enid and Barbie Bearson, Wayne Feller, Bernice Feller, Millie Schiller, Zelda and Mo Bearson. Stephen and Sandy with Stephen's mother, Ray Victor. All right, I threw this in because we all remember bar mitzvahs at the JCC. That's what they looked like, with the reception line in the basement. And the evening upstairs with the massive head tables and the band behind on stage. And some of the people my age, starting from the left, the Skippy Chronic, Stan Fogel, Donnie Loeb, Frank Slover, E.L. Drazen, myself, Norman Gluby, Alan Baker, Joel Wasserman, and the cousin from New York. Same group, Donnie Loeb, Arlene Schway, Harvey Swedlov, Sandy Marcello. That is a partial picture of Linda Wasserman, Barbie Bearson, Mr. and Mrs. Steinman, Sam Victor, Stan cutting the line to get his food. The cruises. Lil Wasserman and Carl Wasserman with my parents on a cruise. I believe this is another cruise with Sam and Ann Toller. Do you have any idea which cruise it is? There were so many. These are the freed children that I had talked about, the grandchildren of the Gettlemans. The Oscar winner is this little guy. I'd like to mention some 1960s memories. During those years, many of my dad's clients approached him to join in their business ventures. Jack Pleat and Joe and Saul became partners in Sanko. Through the 60s, as government grew tremendously in size and space, Sanko bid for office cleaning contracts, sandblasting work, office window cleaning, and cleaning supplies. Alex Sherman record stores. When Alex and Treble Clef were the only modern-style record shops in this area, my dad was a small partner for a few years. Sam Macy and my dad claimed that they gave Zev Vered his very first job, his first construction contract after graduating as an engineer from McGill University, building on Macy Boulevard near Kirkwood. My Uncle Saul was very friendly with Howard Darwin and Billy Joe, the mayor of the Chinese community, so they held a share of the Sampan restaurant on Carling and later the London Arena and London Knights junior hockey team. Some 60s memories for us baby boomers. The Royal Burger, egg rolls at the Golden Palace, the Kennedys, where were you when Jack Kennedy was killed, the Ottawa House, Glenlee and Chaudière, Sunday night dances at the JCC, and my personal favorite, in 1965, the day I saw Sandy Mendelsohn come off the bus at Camp Bridge. Stan met his wife Fran at the same camp, so many of our generation did the same thing. We'll show you some 60s slide. That is Auntie Rita. It's not related to the talk, but it's important for the strength of our community. We appreciate she's at the Bar-Lev line at the Suez Canal, and if she had been there on Yom Kippur in 1973, we'd probably still be there. Stands with her. The Goldbergs. I think Mrs. Goldberg is here. That's the Taylors, is it not? Chicken Rose Taylor. Must be at a bar mitzvah. I found the slide. Okay. That's Dora and my mother. Go ahead, Sam. Yeah. Lil Zabar and her son Steven Zabar and Sadie Shapiro from the Bodnoff clan. Here's Ritzy Gould, and Mrs. Kaufman, and Lil Zabar, and Victor Gould. Beautiful picture of Ritzy. That's Sam and Ray Victor. Zelda and Mo Bearson. What dining rooms looked like in those days. I love the curtains. That's Toby Weiner, I believe. Yeah. And Enid Bearson, Etty Viner, Lil Zabar, and Auntie, one of the Bodnoff aunties. Which one? We're getting too old. Okay, Sandy. Bonnet's wife? Ronnie Bodnoff's mother. Yeah. That's my grandmother. That's with Mr. and Mrs. Macy, with Sam Macy and his wife. Sandy. Jack and Miriam Pleat. And Ray and Sam Victor and their brother and sister-in-law and brother in the corner of the picture who lived in the States. I like the picture because of Stephen Victor's hair. Lots of hair. I don't know. Oh.
What year? 1973.
1973 with Erwin Gershon. Okay, Sam. This is the last living picture we could find of four of the sisters: Rita Appel, Rose Appel, Sarah and Ray. Go ahead, Sam. Now, we're down to the last three pictures, which are relatively modern pictures. There's a very recent picture of Joseph Aegis with his children and 9 grandchildren. And Joseph Aegis with his 9 grandchildren. And that's the last living picture we have of my father and mother together. Now, in conclusion, I would like to try to put into perspective how my dad sees his life experience in Ottawa. Firstly, he came from a disadvantaged start in life. Through hard work, he overcame it. At age 84, he still goes to work every single day, including Saturday and Sunday. And the first thing he learned is that effort can make your goals achievable. Secondly, are there heroes in life? To my dad, he says his hero is his mother. He believes that the endurance and sacrifice of his mother and the many people of her generation, like her, just don't get enough credit for what they taught by word and deed, which enabled my father's generation to succeed, and that we, the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren generation, must recognize this fact more than we do. Thirdly, what are the lessons of life in Ottawa through the events of the past 85 years? If we were to choose any time in history to live in, certainly the last 55 years have been special times. If there really are miracles, we have been witness to the miracle of the birth and growth of the State of Israel. Israel straightens our backs and gives us special pride to call ourselves Jews. In turn, our partnership with Israel requires our contribution, and my father has tried to live by these principles, especially his involvement with the Jewish National Fund and the great work that it does, and I'm sure Norman Barban will agree with that. Fourthly, we must make certain that the local Jewish community and its institutions, which keep this community viable, are well supported. And finally, we must not forget that the environment in which so many of my dad's generation were able to succeed is right here in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. We have a further duty to make certain Ottawa's institutions are strong. The hospitals, schools, the Ottawa Senators, which my dad considers part of the Ottawa fabric. He told Rod Brydon that he was present at the auditorium when the Ottawa Senators last won the Stanley Cup in 1927, and that he wanted to see that happen again in his lifetime. What he didn't tell Mr. Brydon is that he and his friends had to sneak into the game because they had no money to pay for it. My final notes from conversations with my dad were, I want something to be proud of in our city. I want to be part of it. He has lived by that credo. That is his legacy. That is the message he would like our generation and following generations to follow. Thank you.
I'm going to take questions from the floor. I will ask you to talk loudly so that we can get it recorded. Are there any questions? Yes. Any further questions? Joe, come on forward.
I am so pleased to see so many of my, I don't want to call them old friends because they're not old in spirit, but people that I've known, well, since I was, I guess, in kindergarten. There's a few of us like that. But what Murray spoke of, and I'd like to stress that very much, because some of the things I have accomplished with my background, I thought I would never be able to do that. And when I got a chance, as Murray said also, I want to see something that I can be proud of in this city. This is why I invested, for instance, in the Ottawa Senators. And I did tell Mr. Bryden, who runs the club, I want to see a Stanley Cup here before I disappear on this earth. The last time I saw one was, I guess maybe Carl was with me, was when we sneaked into the Ottawa Auditorium, and we saw a Stanley Cup game where Ottawa won the Stanley Cup for that year. That was in 1927. Now, if I'm around and I can speak for that, or about that, I think some of the young people around here ought to get to do something.
Joe, make a comparison of 25 cents of what we used to pay to get into the auditorium.
Yes, of course.
Today, what you spend for your Ottawa Senator.
Even if you wanted to pay, you paid a quarter to get into the rush end, which was concrete slabs, and you sat on it. One of the things when we were youngsters, we did get involved in sports. And I, for one, and remember this, I have one good arm. I played ball, I played hockey, and I guess one of the reasons is because I had a very good friend in Carl Wasserman. We've been friends over 80 years. Now, the reason I mentioned Carl, I guess something which I think didn't cost very much, but really meant a lot, after we had lunch, we used to run home and back to school. After we had lunch, Mr. Borley, who had a grocery store on York Street, Carl had a charge account there. He'd go in and buy 2 cents worth of candy and say, charge it. And which he did, and at the end of the month, he was lucky enough to get an allowance from his father, and he paid the bill. But Carl always shared. He was lucky enough also to get a bicycle. And many a times I sat on the bar, and he drove me to school with him. So we went through high school together. Those were rather difficult times for most people, but I think we had happy times. A lot of the happy times that I had, I think Carl had a lot to do with, because he could always get a hold of a few cents, which I couldn't get. So I have a different look on money. Some people think that money doesn't buy very much, but if you're smart, you can do a lot with it. Because I started with nothing, and I'm fortunate enough to be able to have my name on this building. If you go into the Civic Hospital, you'll see a name around in different places, and I'm not through there. And I'm not through in many places because before I disappear, I want to do some more good to our community. So I hope that maybe my background and what I've accomplished will tell you a story that you can do things if you want to. Yes, I work hard. I'm now 84 years old, but I work 7 days a week. I think work is good for you. You learn to take aggravation, but work is good for you. And that's what I've always taught myself. As far as this record in school, in public school, I wasn't first. But for some reason, I've got to tell this little story because I didn't know I was so clever. In public school, I was an ordinary kid and going through public school. When I got into high school, the first term, somehow I became first. I was first. Now, Murray's told you a little bit about my mother. My mother did not have a happy life. She had her job was constantly to look after her children. She had 3 children. You heard the story. Nobody was poorer than we were, but somehow we were happy children. So I think I can be an example to some people anyway, if they want to really make a fortune. That work is the only way I know how. So I want to thank you all for coming. It's really nice to see many of the people I haven't seen in a long time. Unfortunately, the Badenoch clan, which used to be a very large clan, has diminished to not so large. I remember one picnic one time we had. I think I had 150 cousins in Ottawa or Montreal in the area. We're way down now, unfortunately. But it's nice to see the relatives that are around now. I always was one who liked family life. So my relatives, who we used to go visiting every Sunday, I think helped me out a lot. Helped me out in my ambition and what I would like to do. I just thought, I wish my mother was around just now because she'd walk 4 blocks before she'd spend 10 cents on a bus, you know. That's the kind of person she was because she knew she didn't have it. And she never liked to take money from Saul or from me. But what I could do for her now, unfortunately, she's not here. So thank you all for coming. And I hope there is a lesson in some of this because I can still think of it. As far as Carl is concerned, unfortunately, a lot of the friends I had are gone now. And we were good friends from the age, I guess, of 4. And he was a good friend. And he was a good friend to me when I needed a good friend. Because I never had a copper in my pocket, and he always had a nickel or something like that, and that was enough for 2 people. And he shared. I never forgot that. So thank you, Carl.
Carl, I guess this is part of your evening too. How would you like to come forward and say a few words? You feel up to it? Sure.
You think I'm just going to give you the mic all night?
No.
Hey.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me honestly say that this is an evening I would never have missed. As Joe told you, we go back for over 80 years. That's a long time in our life. We've seen a lot together. We've done a lot together. One episode I'd like to bring to you. Joe and I and our wives used to get off a streetcar at the end of the Hull Road and walk over to a place which became sacred to us and Old Ironsides. I don't know if any of you remember that place. And when Joe was studying his accountancy course, thank you. When Joe was at his accountancy course, his books that he had invested so many dollars were his most precious possessions. Unfortunately, one day, we picked an old rowboat and we tried to go downriver with it, and his books ended up at the bottom of the river. This always reminds me because we dug for those books for over 2 hours. It took about 4 hours for them to partially dry, and that was Joe's precious possessions in 1936. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm so happy to be here to celebrate an old friend, his life, and his accomplishments. Thank you very much for coming.
Anybody else want to say anything or any questions? I just come ahead.
Whatever was said here this evening, I've got to reiterate one small thing. Having worked for Joe, he taught most of the people going through the firm where we all worked how you have to really get along, and hard work was always one of the things that he pushed upon us, and it really paid off because all the people that did come out of the firm came out very, very well educated in accountancy. And thank you for everything, Joe.
Anybody else want to say something? In my travels not this summer, the previous summer, a couple of occasions I spoke to Joe. He always reiterated the hardships that he endured in going to Cheder, the times that he would have to walk from the end of the railroad line on Bank Street to his home. And he endured these hardships in order to improve himself and his education and make his mother proud. And Joe, I'm not very good with words, as I say, but I'm sure your mother's watching this evening. I would like to call upon Mel Goldberg to thank the speaker.
I must say that I apologize for standing here. I'm not an Ottawan. I'm not a member of this very large mishpucha that I see here, and therefore I'm quite a stranger. But in a way, perhaps, I'm the best qualified to say an appreciation to Murray Aegis, and to his father, and to Carl Wasserman, who does know me. I have been in Ottawa, I'm just a neophyte. I've only been here 40 years. And although I'm a member of the bar, I don't think Murray and I have ever crossed paths. But the name of Aegis is one that I know well. Obviously, the Aegis family are the true representatives of the Rock of Aegis. And I know Matt. I knew Matt well. Matt and I served in the 428 Squadron overseas. Matt was the deputy commander of the Ottawa Post of the Jewish War Veterans of Canada, of which I now have the honor to be the commander. And I want to say to you, sir, and to your family, that your father has something to be proud of. He has you. I want to say to you, sir, that you are a light to the entire community, and I'm sure that we all, how can I say we all, that you are a source of appreciation that can never be dimmed. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, and I want to thank you all for coming here, to being here with the Ottawa Jewish Historical Society. Murray, I thank you. I have a token of the appreciation that we have for you. I have one more thing to say. The Ottawa Post of the Canadian Jewish War Veterans has written and sponsored a book called There I Was. It's the reminiscences of some 35 of Ottawa residents who served in the armed forces. We have some books here. The books were produced under the aegis of retired Wing Commander Cy Toronto and Morton Baslaw and Maury Chronic. And they have produced a book that will live just the way the Aegis family lives in the annals of Ottawa. And I urge you all to buy them. The price is merely at $12. Thank you very much.
I had a privilege of a quick look at the book yesterday, and there are 495 names of service personnel, women and men, who served in the Second World War, whose families now live in Ottawa, and that's truly a lot of people. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of the evening, but not only the beginning of a little bit of refreshments. There's tea and coffee and cookies to serve, and thank you for coming. We look forward to seeing you October 17th. Thank you.